Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's session. We'll kick this off. It's 2:30. Appreciate your time in attending today's session. My name is Ben Elters and I am the Ascension Client Director and your host for today's session. Today's session will be presented by Dan Cox, who is the CEO of Ascension Services, and James Harper, who's the Managing Director of Harper Stone. Today, Dan will talk about data as a language and the building blocks around the importance of data governance and the quality of data. James will focus on how to empower your frontline staff to lead the way, drive cultural change, and modernize analytics. Today's session is slated to run for 45 minutes with a Q&A session at the end of the demonstration. So it would be great if you could hold your questions to the end. We'll be recording today's session and the recording will be available to you after the session. We will email you the link and we encourage you to share it amongst your peers. Without further ado, I'll hand you across to Dan.
Good day, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction, and thank you, James, for letting me come on as a guest speaker with a very important topic, data governance. Having spent the last 20 plus years in the fields of data, analytics, and intelligence, just like many of you attending this session today, we know that these areas have seen great transformation, with technology being the primary enabler. Just like in the past, the importance of valuable information has not changed. However, I do believe it is harder than ever to produce valuable, high quality, accurate, and meaningful information, needing to wade through the immense amount of data that is now available to us so easily. And why I think there has been even a terminology change from intelligence to analytics. There are so many analytics nowadays. Is it really intelligence or just another set of charts and graphs? We've gone so far that we've created a new job class, the data scientist. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe they can be a very productive and a highly insightful group to any organization. We've hired them to help us wade through our data muck, to find meaningful context. But is it intelligence? What is important? What is relevant? What is intelligence or just information? Just because we have more data, it doesn't make it intelligence, nor does it necessarily make it important to report. We need to treat data as a language. It is a language. Without treating data as a language, we will be unable to make meaningful evaluations of it. Nor can we then decide what is important and conversely, what isn't. What makes something intelligence, not just noise. If I flip my screen to the next slide and show a snapshot of streaming data, can you tell me what this information is? Of course not. It's streaming unstructured messages from many global sources. Now, if I start to structure it, now you can see that it is data and could be legible, but it still isn't consumable nor usable, and there's a lot of it. Unless we establish data as a language, an organizational language, data means nothing. Each organization must find its own data voice. Once we realize this, we can start to understand how we want to tell stories with it. What story does your organization, start to understand how we want to tell stories with it? What story does your organization, your department, your team want to tell? Is it the number of satisfied customers you have? Or the number of cases you've resolved? Or how secure your network is? Telling a story requires paragraphs, sentences, grammar, spelling, and common definitions. We need to apply these types of rules to our data. This is the makeup of data governance. Just as you can tell, my accent is not Australian, it's American. but I am using the English language. Aussie and American English is similar, but not the same. Something I have had to get used to. Slight changes in spelling, the use of S instead of Z, the use of U instead of just OR, pronunciation differences, grammatical differences, not using articles, to hospital, to the hospital. We can still understand each other, but if I were to start speaking Portuguese or Hebrew or Chinese, you might not. The grammar is completely different. Words are different. How you read across or down the page is different. Each organization has its own data language. Many organizations have clutched on to the very trendy saying from the last few years, data-driven company. This is just lip service if the executive teams don't have data governance as a critical capability on their priority list. This doesn't mean that data governance must be driven as an enterprise big bang implementation. On the contrary, those organizations that start from the bottom up with guidance and sponsorship from the top succeed at a staggeringly higher rate. Start small. What are the stories you need to tell? What are the common team definitions of terms, of metrics, of those calculations? What are the sources of data needed to contribute to those measures, those calculations, and the telling of that story? This is the beginning of data governance framework. Many of you already have some of this, so what do we do next? Democratize it, discuss it, empower your teams with it. If your teams know how to read the organizational data language, then they know how to use it. It makes sense. They buy in, and the ever important data literacy increases. Again, just like any language, especially written, if you don't have ever increasing literacy rates, communicated intelligence is impossible. Data literacy is just the same. If we have some substance of common definition, structure, and rules, and these are widely disseminated, educated, and made available, then literacy is increased. And so is the usage, adherence of increased. And so is the usage, adherence of data intelligence. If we want to enable our front line, we must educate, train, and continually communicate how to read. How many years have you and I spent in reading and writing classes? Now let me put data governance in practice for the previous data sets that I showed. Let's have a look. Okay, so here are two graphs. Very familiar information, which is extremely relevant in today's pandemic situation. Over the last 3 months, we have been bombarded with information around COVID-19. We have been educated, information disseminated, reporting processes communicated, definitions standardized, data collections formalized, quality checks established and monitored, data governance in practice. The graphs are telling a story, and we understand it because of the governance and heightened literacy. Do your teams respond to their data, reporting, and analytics just as clearly and definitively as you and I right now are reading these graphs? Is governance in place? How's their literacy? All right, so what's next? Every language has a history and lineage. So does your data. Where does your information come from to tell your story? Can we map it? Who owns it? Who collects it? Who stores it? Who transforms it? Who moves it from one place to another? Data lineage is our third key principle in our data governance framework. Without this critical linkage, we cannot establish proper ownership. And without ownership, we cannot establish accountabilities. And without accountabilities, we cannot apply our language rules, structures, and definitions. Without being able to programmatically apply these rules, structures, and definitions to our data, whether at rest or in motion, we leave ourselves open to integrity and quality issues. Each important set of data must have a recognized owner. Otherwise, that information is left to chance and open to interpretation. But just a minute, it might be that you are the data owner. If it's crucial for telling your story and the quality and accuracy must be high, then you probably are pointing the finger at yourself. Establish your administrative data stewards. And I say administrative because everyone on your team is responsible for the quality of information to tell that story. If data is a language and literacy is high and lineage established, then our rules on quality and how to prevent or remediate become clearer and simplified. And thusly, the responsibility of those quality measures can be monitored and managed. There is a difference between a custodian, steward, and owner. Many ICT or CDO departments get these confused. Very little data should actually be owned by these departments. But don't think the rules are unimportant. As custodians and sometimes stewards, as we appoint them, they protect and guard the data and apply all of the governance that has been developed. If data governance is not just lip service, then the entire organization is responsible for the quality of data, from the employee that initially enters data, to the DBA, to the ETL consultant, to the data scientist, to the front line, and to the executive. It's our story. It's our responsibility. Trust is a major pitfall for the front line. If they can't trust what they are seeing, then it is meaningless, and as a result is often discarded. If quality is low, reporting is useless. It tells us nothing of value, no intelligence. If literacy is low, we cannot read the reporting, and there is an inherent distrust of that information. Again, no intelligence. If there is no story, we don't understand what is important and have no guidance or structure, no language, and don't know what is intelligence. Data governance is the establishment of grammar for our organizational data language. It is a framework and a foundation, a process for communicating and forming vision, goals, and the organizational story. It is the adherence and monitoring of those fundamental structures, rules, and definitions. This educates, edifies, and empowers your frontline with trust, comprehension, and intelligent information that enables them to perform their duties. Stories need language. Languages need standards. Standards need understanding. Understanding needs ownership. Ownership needs accountability. And accountability needs monitoring. I've covered a number of topics today in a very compact time frame. Ascension groups data governance into 9 specific sections for more detailed and relevant application, encompassed by business objectives, its people, technology requirements, all as part of the information governance framework. Find your organizational data voice, its language. What's the story you need to tell? That's the important things. How's the literacy rating? Do we need to educate and train and communicate what the data actually is and what it means, what the definitions are? What's the lineage of your important data? Establish your ownership. The quality of data for our story, again, is our responsibility. We'll have a bit of time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. However, I'm always available. So please reach out if you'd like to discuss any of these areas and would like a bit of help with your story and language. I appreciate your time. And now over to James. Thanks, James.
Thanks for the intro, and thanks to everyone joining today. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please drop them into the chat window and we'll come back to them at the end. As business leaders, we're always striving to improve, and I'm one of those people who like to read business biographies, to learn from people who've had success. And one business leader that I do really admire is Jack Welch. Jack Welch led General Electric from 1981 to 2001. He was their youngest ever CEO at age 45, and he grew the company over 2,000% during his leadership. He's well known for saying, "Without doubt, there are lots of ways to measure the pulse of a business, but if you have employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and cash flow right, you can be sure your company is healthy and on the way to winning." Now, he's remembered for many significant changes that he made at GE, and at the time, these changes were really cutting edge. Now they've become commonplace and standard. He loved to change and to have informality in his business. He encouraged people to challenge their managers, and being an engineer, he was passionate about the importance of accurate data. Just like today, as business leaders, we're focused on customer experience, employee experience, and we do know that if we can get those right, we'll see a positive effect on our revenue. And there's been heaps written about customer experience and employee experience. It's one of those sort of very fluffy areas. Knowing exactly what is required to move the dial is a lot less clear. What actions that you as a business leader can take to impact customer experience and employee experience is less clear. So earlier this year, the Harvard Business Review Analytics Services released a research report. What they did was they surveyed 464 business leaders across APAC, North America, and EMEA. And what they showed was that by empowering their frontline workforce with the ability to make decisions, resulted in a 69% increase in customer satisfaction and employee engagement, and a 72% increase in productivity. They split the survey respondents into leaders, so leaders in empowering their frontline, and laggards, so people who didn't empower their frontline workforce. And when they looked at the leaders, 16% of that group experienced revenue growth of more than 30%. And another third had revenue growth in the 10 to 30% range. It's an amazing outcome, but when you think about it, our frontline workers are our retail workers, our nurses, our flight attendants, our maintenance workers, our store managers, our service technician, and our field salespeople. They are that first point of contact between our organisation and our customers. They're the face of our business, and internally they're our champions of the customer. They know our businesses better than anyone else. They know our customers' pain better than anyone else, and they know our inner workings better than anyone else. The details of exactly how things are done inside our organisation. So when we can empower our front line with data and the ability to make decisions, we're removing so many barriers to creating great customer experience. I think it's easy to understand why it's important, but how do we get to the point of empowering our front line? What are the things that we have to do? So in the study, they found 3 key areas consistently across leading companies about how they'd empowered their workforce. The starting point has to be leading the way, starting from the very top of the organisation. Executive buy-in is critical to success. The attitudes of executives were starkly different across the leader and the laggard groups, with just under half of the laggard companies refusing to allow their frontline to make decisions. That compares to just 4% of leading companies. So if their executive were not on board opening up data access and allowing the frontline to make decisions, then it's going to be really a struggle, if not impossible, to have a successful outcome. The executive also has to believe in data-driven decision-making. They have to trust in the data. They need to move away from gut feel style of management to a fact-driven management. and they have to be invested in data fluency, not just for their teams, but also for themselves. There's some really good tools out there that are available to help assess where your company is in terms of data maturity, and I've got one that I use and I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested after the presentation. So if we have the company leadership on board, then we're on the way to driving that cultural change across the business. The starting point is to invest in training. So this is typically focused around the tools, which is, which buttons to press and so on. But that's just a starting point. People need to develop data fluency. And by that I mean a level of comfort and confidence when working with the data. And they have to learn what the data means and how to apply it to make decisions. So this is far from a tick and flick exercise of just sitting inside a classroom for an hour or a day. It does take time and it takes support ongoing on the job. A really effective change management approach is to develop data champions or data influencers. And these are people who are across your business who can help the frontline workers to answer their own data questions, and they learn to apply data to their decision making. So our data influencers, they often come from our previously centralized analytics teams, but by building that data fluency across the front line, what we're doing is we're effectively scaling out. We're enabling self-service, and that frees up our core analytics teams. A company that's done this really well is Verizon, and they use that data champion approach to build data fluency across their front line. Now, before this change, their analyst team were the only group providing data insights, and they were only able to support around 300 questions per month. Now, with their employees able to directly access the data they need, they're answering more than 2,000 questions a month. That's a 566% increase in questions answered across the business. So if you think about how many analysts you would have had to put on, you can see that this is a much more effective way of enabling your workforce. So data modernization. So the final piece of that puzzle is data modernization. Now, this is often just thought of as moving from on-prem data stores to cloud-based data warehouses like Snowflake, Redshift, and so on. But that's just one part of a modernization program. So yes, with growing volumes of data, cloud-based warehouses are becoming very important. They offer the scaling that we need to be able to provide access to large volumes of data widely, so many users across our organization. But there also needs to be an investment in data governance and security. So right at the start of the process, I touched on the need for the executive to have trust in the data. So is the data clean? Is it accurate and reliable? Is it complete? And that's something that Dan's spoken extensively about, but it's critical to success. As we provide more of our organization access to our data, we need to have robust security to ensure that each person only has access to the data that they are allowed and also need to see. The last part of data modernization is to make the information accessible to our users. So there's a very literal meaning, which is, able to be used on our mobiles and tablet devices, but it also encapsulates providing the data in a way that's understandable to the end user. So our frontline employees, they don't and they shouldn't need to know or understand how data is structured. They shouldn't need to understand dimensions and facts to simply find out what the top selling products were for last year. So data modernization is also about providing them a way to ask a question and to answer it that is easy for them to understand. So Suncorp is an Australian business, and they've already been along this journey. They've rolled out a program to empower their claim operations team. So prior to this change, their claim operations team were reliant on a centralized analytics team to provide reports and answer every question that they had about their data. It was causing huge frustration on both sides, delays on the operations side, and their analyst team just doing sort of endless monkey work of generating reports. So about 2 years ago, they deployed a new platform that allowed their claim team to use natural language to ask questions of the data. And in a very short period of time, with that greater access and knowing the business intricately, their claim operations team identified $30 million worth of new opportunities, which is pretty impressive. Vodafone Business has taken it another step further. So initially they rolled out a platform to help their internal teams That allowed them to quickly identify customers that had anomalies. So, for example, mobile phone users that had really high call charges. And so, with that information, their team was able to proactively contact customers and help them manage their account and reduce charges. So, that's resulted in a significant drop in customer churn. So after that success of empowering their frontline, they took it one step further to actually roll out access to their 10,000 enterprise customers and their 1.1 million small medium business customers. So again, they're using natural language search to understand their own billing and call information. So there's been a huge improvement in their customer experience, which has significantly dropped call volumes to their customer support, and also it's had an amazing 45% increase in their net promoter score. So some great success stories, but what's the other side? So where can things go wrong? Where can they become derailed? The top 5 areas from the original survey were lack of support from middle management. So a really key part of change management is that yes, it needs to be driven from the top, but we also need to bring everyone along from all levels of the organization on the journey. We need to train everyone, and we need to support middle management to provide that environment to frontline workers so they can feel confident to make the decisions, and that when they do make a mistake, that it's going to be okay. We touched right back at the start the importance of top leadership driving and believing in the change, and that really flows through to those next 2 barriers: funding the tools that are needed, investing in training for our frontline workforce, and then the last one is the lack of effective change management, which is typically seen across all projects. So where to from here? The survey showed that over half of the 464 respondents were expecting to be moving to a self-service analytics in the next 2 years. And that report was released earlier in the year before COVID. And given the significant impact of COVID, how has that changed things? So another survey by Dresden Advisory that was run each month. So looking in February, sort of early on, we had 9% of respondents saying that they found that self-service would be critical to their business, versus now in April, so post-COVID, that has jumped up 34%. So as we've had our distributed workforces and no longer able to have, in offices working, that has now increased significantly. So it looks now that enabling self-service is going to be a major focus for quite a number of companies over the next couple of years. Thanks for your time. I mentioned during my presentation that I do have data-driven maturity assessment, so if anyone would like that, just drop me a message either in the chat now or via email, and I'll send you out a copy. And I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anyone does have them, just drop them into the chat.
Thank you, James and Dan. Very insightful presentation on data as a language and how organisations empower their frontline workforce. So there's been a couple of questions that have come through, and I might throw it out to, I think the first one's for Dan. You've given us a lot to think about, and data governance doesn't seem as simple as you've put it. You haven't provided a lot of materials here. Are you going to send some out?
That's a very good question. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'll definitely address it. Yeah, we certainly did cover a number of different areas, and yes, we can certainly send some out. We will send some material out when we send the link out with later on with the recording. However, data governance is quite, there are some generic materials that we've actually produced, some checklists and some evaluations on where you're at with your story, with how you've actually set up your definitions and certain pieces of the data governance area. But it really depends on each organization as well, and what they actually want to get out of it, because data governance is a big topic. There are a number of different things, and if we did jump back to that screen with the 9 different areas. It's a massive piece of work. But what I was suggesting as well is that we focus on what is actually important, and what is important, as James also showed, was that each organization has its own important elements. Suncorp was not the same as a couple of the other entities that he talked about. So what we need to do is actually have a discussion, and I'm happy to have that discussion, and then I can certainly have some of the guys put together a more cohesive understanding of what you should actually look at. So happy to have those chats as well. It makes it much more pertinent, more relevant to what you're trying to achieve, because everyone's business objectives are different, and what you should actually tackle as far as the next piece that you need to tackle for data governance is different. And we just don't want you to go down and start to do a bunch of activities that may not necessarily help you along that path. I hope I answer that question thoroughly enough.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, here's another one, and that's, I suppose that's for Dan and James, whoever wants to answer. So, in your experience, how do you get the executives to onboard a project to give the frontline access to data? Probably more yours, James.
Yep. Yeah, I think like obviously that's the key starting point to making sure that it's going to be a successful one, is making sure that the exec is on board. In my experience, there's been a couple of key areas that you really want to tackle. Probably starting, that they want to know that investment and I guess the risk that they're taking on by they might see it as risk opening up that data to their front line. They want to have a level of confidence, I guess, that it is going to deliver some tangible business outcomes. So I think talking through similar examples, like some of the ones that we've talked there, customer churn, NPS, things that are actually really easy to measure, and that you can track how that change is having an impact on the business. I think the other thing that I've found a lot of is the importance of taking the time to also help educate the executive in terms of data literacy. So I think that across the board, there was a quote in my deck there. It's something that we do need to invest in. So it's really key to make sure that we're helping increase that literacy of our executive. And I think making sure that you're, weaving those skills into scenarios that they can really make sense of is the best way to do that. So I'd say definitely having measurable business outcomes, being clear about risk management, and then making sure you're increasing their literacy so they can understand the impacts of it.
Thanks, James. So I'm just reading through a few here. How do you think COVID will impact data transformation projects?
I'll start with that one, and I think James, you'll probably have some comments on it as well. I think there are two basic areas that it'll actually affect. One is the priority of the data project. So as each organization is looking at the number of different data projects they probably do have, they'll need to prioritize those. And some of those integrations will not continue to occur because they're probably a little bit too costly, and the businesses that they may have acquired, or the reason why they needed that integration, they could probably wait for a little while to be able to see how the world turns out in the next few months, and then re-establish those, especially if they're separated businesses where they can still run on them. And I've actually had a few conversations with some of the very large entities that in Sydney that actually have acquired a couple big businesses, and were before COVID actually looking at doing integrations, and have actually decided not to at this point, at least have not decided that it's worthwhile to continue down that right now. Outside of that, because they were still able to get all the analytics and all the decision information in each of the businesses, and they were still running relatively separate. Now, if it is integration that is crucial to telling a story, like I was discussing earlier, you have to actually do that integration. So in those areas, we have seen an uptake in integration projects, especially in data management and master data management, because of the need to make decisions on proper information. So if you don't have good hierarchy management, data quality management, master data and reference data, especially around the automation of the newer technologies using ML and AI to actually help with the metadata management and help with, of course, then master data management. It really is significant to be able to get those together, to be able to do the analytics and enable both the frontline and the executives to make appropriate decisions. So there are two stems to it. One is whether or not the integration is a high priority. Two, if it is crucial and necessary, then it's certainly being accelerated in those types of projects. James, you want to answer the other side?
Yeah. I think from my side, so from the, I guess the front lines experience, with those distributed workforces, it's really put the spotlight on, the blockers to making decisions, and also more distributed decision making. So I think from that perspective, we're only expecting that to increase. I think the other area that we've seen sort of continual investment is cybersecurity. So, and I think how that applies to data, the storage, all of those type of things. I think that's going to be a continued area of investment. And it probably has more of a focus now. It's because it's getting a lot of media coverage. So I think that those elements of data projects will sort of bump up even higher.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. Are there any online data governance resources or tools that would help facilitating a rapid transition to the practice?
That's actually a very, very good question. There are some, and in particular, I'll have to ask resources, as in white papers, blogs, etc., and being able to help you with checklists, etc. Yes, we've got a number of those resources, and again, part of what we'll do is start to send some of those out for those of you that want them. We will send a couple when we send out the link for the recording, but also attach some resources there. And if you desire some more of them, yes, we can definitely do it. As far as tools to help you more rapidly transition into practice, we do have a couple of partners that have a number of tools, including Gartner, that we can make available as well. It's probably, if you reach out to us and actually we have a chat to understand what you're looking for or what we can help you with, then we can probably point you in a better direction, because there are some significant amounts of tools available to us.
Thanks, Dan. This is an interesting one. This is probably geared towards you, Dan. It says the 9 areas of data governance you showed is a huge task. If we ever start small, what do you see as the most important step or task area to focus on to get traction?
Yeah, that is absolutely a good question. So, what's important to you? Again, that needs a little bit more understanding of what your objectives are, what you need to achieve, because obviously it's different for an internal division versus a frontline division, such as a customer service or a call center, versus an IT department or ICT or development division. Obviously, to tell your story, you need to understand what your story is, first of all. What is the most important thing that you need to tell from your team, your department, what your supervisor needs to do, what your manager needs to do, on up to the channel? What's the important? Why do you actually exist? I know that's a hard question to ask yourselves, but as a team, what is the most important task that you are actually mandated with? And with that, then that actually comes out what's important as far as what needs to be reported. And therefore, if you know what needs to be reported and what the intelligence is, then we can actually focus on. So again, that flywheel was fairly quick. So if you think about the 9 areas, it's architecture, it's data development, it's the operations management of data, it's the security of that management, right? It's RDM, it's MDM, it's your analytics and BI management. Then, of course, you've got the other pieces around document and content management. And then you've also got metadata management and data quality. So those are the 9 areas that we look at. So which one of those is more important than the other? Well, I can't really say unless I understand what your story is, and then we can start to focus in on. But I do think from a data governance perspective, if we know what your story is, that dictates exactly what the intelligence is, and then looking at the definitions that make up that, right? So common definitions, and then looking at your ownership of each of those pieces of data. So I would say still that understanding what your story is, what the most important piece is, helps us to focus in, because it could be development of data, it could be the architecture, it could be the security of it, it could be the operations, or it could be actual master data, depending if it's customer service orientated or product orientated, or legal entities, or finance for chart of accounts, hierarchies for internal, external reporting. So I can't tell you exactly, but if you start out with defining what your story is, that helps with telling us what's the most important thing. All right, I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thanks, Dan. I think there's one more that's just come through. How do you see the link between the business and IT departments?
James, did you want to take that, or do you want me to?
I was just taking a deep breath. There you go, Dan.
Yeah. Look, in the context of data governance, there's the CDO and the IT or the SEO or ICT departments are the people that actually put it to work, right? But data governance should be owned by the business, because it's the business that actually understands the data. If it's customer service data, if it's marketing data, if it's product data, if it's sales data, if it's financial data, IT, yes, they understand how to control data. They understand what the data is and how it should be structured, but they don't necessarily understand the business context behind that information. And therefore, the business must own it. They must drive the data governance, because if the business doesn't care about quality, whether you want to do preventative or remediation, and you don't care about the information that's coming out, neither does the IT department, neither does the CDO's department. They're in control of policing, managing, operating, and controlling it. So unless you tell them what's important, everything to them is important. But the understanding of what the data is in the business context is less important. Now, the relationship between the business and the internal departments, data departments, is extremely important and crucial, because you have to work together. One has to apply the data governance, one has to develop the data governance ideas and rules.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'm just trying to see if there's any more. We don't seem to have any more questions, and I think we've hit close to 45 minutes. Once again, thank you for attending today's session. We look forward to hearing back from you. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to either Dan, James, or myself. Your email addresses are there in front of you. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, and thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.